Kia ora koutou and welcome. I'm Anne-Marie Case-Miller and thanks for joining me for morning tea with Smash. Hope you've got your coffee and I hope you're sitting comfortably. Now, normally, of course, we catch up face to face on farm and we have morning tea and we have a coffee and a cuppa. And we want to say a quick thank you to our sponsors who are continuing to make it possible for us to catch up with you. So we've got Dairy NZ, of course, Balance, Diosan, FMG, Pioneer, Rabobank, and of course, Waikato Milking Systems. Thank you so much to all our sponsors. Now, I know we've got viewers from all over New Zealand. Usually we're just in one little spot and one farm, but we're all over New Zealand right now. So thank you for grabbing a cuppa and joining me today. And in fact, thank you to viewers all over the world. I know that a little later on on a recorded viewing, we've got people from Ireland joining in as well. We want to hear from you. We're here for you. So make sure you give us your comments, give us your feedbacks, questions in the live comments box on the YouTube link. Bear in mind, we are working with rural broadband. So if we drop out, be patient, we'll be back. There's nothing better, I always think, than having a coffee and a chat with somebody who knows his stuff and is happy to share it. And Pete Morgan fits that bill perfectly. Pete, thanks for joining me for a coffee today.
G'day, Annie. You're welcome. You're welcome. I'd challenge the expert part. I think just if you're around long enough, you get a few more things sorted out.
Pete, you've had a varied career along with your partner, Anne, and you've used planning and budgeting to achieve your farming aspirations. So maybe first off, tell us a little bit about your farm and your family. You're based in Pokuru in the Waikato?
That's right. Yeah, South Waikato here. We're just finishing our 20th season on our farm. Prior to that, we share milked in Otorohanga and contract milk there. And yeah, as a farm worker, just out from Oto as well. So I love the King Country, Southern Waikato. There's something about it. Got the best of all the worlds.
So what inspired you to go farming? How did you start out?
Yeah, so it's, well, always exposed. I mean, I grew up in Mangere in Auckland initially, and then we had a block of land just South Auckland. But loved all the holidays on the Rallies farm. That's a couple of degrees of separation, as of course New Zealand's about with farming. And then we went, moved into South Auckland onto a block of land and just loved it. So went through university, I studied agricultural science and just loved that. I spent a few years in research, but I'd met my wonderful wife Anne, and she's a veterinarian, and it was funny because we were having a weekend on a farm. We're both working, but we were renting a cottage on a farm, and the farmer knocked on the door one Saturday morning saying his worker had shot through on the Friday night and had no idea where he went, and cleared out the house. And so I gave him a hand over the weekend, and by Sunday night he'd offered me the job, and I was in my mid-20s by the stage, and open-minded, and handed him my notice, and we never looked back. Certainly you get to that stage of life and you start lining up the kind of opportunities it's got, but more importantly, what it is you're actually after, and it takes a fair while to work that out. So yeah, it was great coming to it really voluntarily, and decided to make a good go of it right from the start.
You literally seized upon an opportunity that was presented to you, and you've done that right throughout your career. You've worked your way right through the industry, haven't you?
Yeah. We're very fortunate in New Zealand because we have this fantastic stepping stones to work your way through. That's the envy of any agricultural industry in the world, or most industry full stop, where you have significant big jumps from one level up to the next. So between that, the opportunities that inherently exist, the fact that we've got a very stable industry producing a versatile product, and the biggest thing of all is the fact that we generate and share just ridiculous amounts of information, both really personal about how your business is running and all the intricacies, right through to all the science and research that's put out there. So a very, very fortunate structure. So yeah, lots and lots of opportunities along the way, lots of mistakes and dead ends, the odd here and there, but they're mostly about discovering things about yourself more than anything, I think.
So is that how do you and Anne work then when you're making those decisions about what opportunities to pursue? How do you work as a couple?
Yeah, so we've fine-tuned pretty well when we first sat down pretty much on that Sunday night and said, I could throw my job in and we could go farming and we could do this and that. So what do we want? And all of that sort of thing. So it's the real foundation, as I mentioned before, is just being crystal clear about where you're at and where you want to go. And then the process itself for how you actually go about from an opportunity turning up right through to deciding to take it or not take it is something that we've really fine-tuned. So it should be a stimulating, fun, challenging process, starting from just sort of blue sky, piece of paper, scratch down some ideas, do a budget that involves about 4 or 5 numbers, which is about the limit of my my concentration span when it comes to numbers. Fortunately, that is just unbelievable. Yeah. And then right through the subjective approach, which is a real list of all the pros and cons, just anything you can think of an idea, and then on through the next one is the logistics. So logistically, will this thing actually work in your life, your farm, with your resources and machinery and people, and then your kids and schooling and the finite hours you have in the day or energy or whatever, all those straight mechanical logistical things. And then the real engine of it, without a doubt, which is solid, robust financial budgets that actually go right through, broadcast something out, particularly with buying land and big changes to your farm system, that will actually go out, not just for 6 months or a year, will go out like 4 or 5 years when all the costs and benefits and tax implications all play out. And that's for that you need some pretty serious understanding of the infrastructure of the financial budgets to be able to play them out with really good spreadsheets and that. And Anne is fantastic at that. They come out at the end what the pros and cons are financially. So yeah, it's great. And at the end, making the decision or not is something that we really try and make sure that that's a real hard stop that you come to, so that when you do the work and you don't take an opportunity, that is still a very significant thing to do, and that you can have that when you look back, it's very easy to highlight all the things that you did, the opportunities that were successful in that. But the amount of significant learning that we've got out of the ones that we did the work for, decided not to do it, and then you play it out and you find out in a year or two, actually you missed an incredible opportunity, or dodged a bullet on that one. And so we try and really own those. So yeah, it's good. You can't do it without other people.
I was just going to ask, it sounds like a really holistic approach.
Yeah.
And I'm certain that you've got your values as a family and your morals in there. Yes, we'll do that. No, we wouldn't touch that. But also, how important is advice from rural professionals and advisors and other stakeholders? How important are they when assisting in decision making? For instance, the team at Dairy NZ.
Yep. Well, I'm a stalwart believer in the role that Dairy NZ has, in terms of we've paid for it through our levy, we've invested heavily socially in it, the way that we have our discussion groups and we go to advice, the research that it's doing and has built on for all of my career, going right back to Macmillan and Arnold Bryant and all of these guys who built all the real fundamental management processes that we have now, right through to all of the fantastic contemporary research done now in pasture species analysis and reproduction, and now in conjunction with Ireland, some fantastic work. So through that, of course, we have again the envy of the world. I could pick up my phone now and get one of a dozen of some of the top scientists in the world in dairying on the phone, if I could catch them, or have them ring me back to ask any advice, let alone the consulting officers that we have around that are there, able to organise groups. So no, it's fantastic. And but the other thing it tends to represent in terms of where we get information and advice, that's pretty significant. And we've got some brilliant rural professionals, so bankers and seed merchants and fertiliser and all of those who we use a lot. And they've got, in some ways, one hand, they've got a vested interest because their businesses are tied up with ours. Well, the banker certainly is. We owe enough money that the old cliche that the amount that we owe, I don't lose any sleep over, but he tends to traditionally lose quite a bit of sleep over it, which is kind of the right way around for it. But with Dairy NZ, we're actually talking about very objective, unbiased, and I mean that in a constructive way, empirical research, which is really important because when push comes to shove, you've got to base everything on something that's a bedrock. So, yeah, no, it's great. We're very, very fortunate.
A few weeks ago, you presented at a workshop in Te Awamutu, and you talked to some very interesting ideas and facts. Can you tell me more about that now?
Yeah, sure. So it was really just distilling out a few of the things that give some structure to the process that we use, what they're based on, and then some of the external influences that we have. And I could actually just flick through a couple of the slides if you want. I'm very obsessed by PowerPoint, so anyone who happens to be listening, don't feel threatened. I'll switch over.
The processes and the actual steps that you take to, once you have an idea, it's all very well having an idea, but you've got to come out the other end, and there's all this stuff in between.
Yeah, very much so.
Figure it out.
Yeah, that's right. It's very much, and it's the stuff in between that really matters. It's very easy to, it's a bit like a game of rugby or football where you concentrate on that goal that was scored, but you ignore the other 89 minutes of a football game where everyone else has worked and worked and worked to build up to it, and that's what really matters. So
yes.
This is this is the view from my cowshed and from my back door. That's a reasonable motivation on its own. So typical South Waikato, and the main things I whipped through was for us not understanding what our goals are, but understanding what sort of motivates and gives structure and life to them. The extremely important SWOT analysis, which I'll just put through, what our process is, and I just talked briefly about that, the role of budgeting, and then how you turn it into action, because talk's cheap, but action's what actually counts.
Yeah.
Or not bothering to take action when you decide to reject something. So we think of it as whether we have a great plan and a great idea, and at the end we decide to execute the plan or execute the plan. So family and life and sport and all that's been a huge part of the last 20 years, and it was a big part of our primary decision to go farming, because we knew that I'd be able to have breakfast with the kids, have a flexible business, and we'd create a lifestyle. But for us, the clarity of what stage of life, and now all three kids have left home except during this lockdown. We're very fortunate to have them with us for a month or so, which is wonderful. Two of them are beavering away, carrying out their job via Zoom right now in other rooms. You asked initially, Annie, about how we got into farming, so being really clear about those core reasons for why we actually still are very, very important. Taking full ownership of the good fortune that comes along. So those opportunities, lots of them were created by just being the right place, right time, and very fortunate to those, and learned a lot from the cock-ups, the things that actually tried stuff out, discovered that either it wasn't right, or more importantly, I wasn't in the right spot. And then definitely resetting goals in the background. Yeah, so here's our farm. The black was the original farm we bought 20 years ago, and we've added on a few other blocks and have some fantastic equity partners who joined us a few years ago and live at the blue end and have a stake in the whole operation. And we cut through 2 sheds and got Petra and Paul, some fantastic staff with us, and Graham is a part-time. So can I just talk briefly about SWOT,
Yes.
which is the strength, weaknesses, opportunities, threats. So the reason we do this is in order to work out where the heck you're going, you've really got to understand where you're at right now. That's what is much, much more important than what's ahead of you, because all of them need to be seen in the context of where you're at now. So, for example, a financial opportunity comes up. If you don't fully understand your debt loading and your ability, what your cash flow is doing, your ability to pay off debt and drive your business, those financial opportunities are just a straight gamble and a roll of the dice, and doesn't make any sense, does it? So, so SWOT gives this great 3-dimensional. So the idea of your strengths and weaknesses, you start digging into and you build them up and really understand them, understanding your strengths modestly and matter-of-factly, and totally own all the weaknesses and characteristics. So here's an example for us that Anne and I have got great complementary skills, as do our equity partners, good at budgeting. We're on a dry winter farm. We're very committed. We've got a super low cost of production, just to pick a few. Balanced against that, we're often can be way overcommitted, got stretched pretty thin. We've got lots of limitations of a low input system, and we get very, very dry in the summer. Okay, so it's easy to stop at that point and say, okay, now I understand the business. Yep. But I was talking with someone this morning about this, that it's so easy to look at that and stop, but you're only 10% of the way there in terms of what you can get out of a SWOT if you stop at that point, because the strengths are where your opportunities will come. The more you understand those, the more you'll be looking for those open doors that are around that you keep walking past and not seeing them there. And so as an example, that we realize as a team, we've got a synergy that we realize that we're able to achieve a fair bit because we work together rather than any individual help. We're able to see the long game and have a lot more confidence, and we're able to, with our high quality land, stock and people, we know that we will sustainably get very good production. Okay, so lots of opportunities keep coming up from those strengths, and that's where we look to them for. Conversely, our biggest threats that will ever come along come from those things that are weak. Okay, so summer drought, for example, is an obvious one that it proposes a very, very high risk. We've got very little machinery, so we're very reliant on contractors. So we're very exposed to some of the risks that are there. And a big one is we're so reliant on our particular input that if any way that we have an incapacity, there's a very significant risk to the whole business. So the SWOT ends up being a really important thing that we just keep revisiting over and over. There's an intriguing little sideline, if you don't mind if I just whip off on that's had quite a big influence on our business. And this is called Survivour Bias. Okay, so this comes out of the Second World War, where they had planes coming back into Britain, which were severely damaged, and so the engineers were forever trying to work out how to protect and reinforce them. And this is extremely relevant for our business as to how we've navigated through all the challenges that have come in and all the shrapnel that's hit it in the past. And what was happening was they were fixing all these parts of the plane that were shot up and going over and over it, and finding it didn't have a large influence on the success of the whole war effort. So along came this mathematician, and he said, you've got the total wrong end of the stick. That, in actual fact, it's all those parts that weren't hit. Those are the parts that you need to make sure that you put all the extra armament over. Can you see how that's counterintuitive? Because if you're getting attacked from some place, that is the area that you're surely going to end up trying to shore up your business. But of course, what was missed by everyone, and this guy had identified, was these were the ones that made it back. that all those that got hit in those areas that are not bullet ridden were the ones who actually got downed. And so as they started putting more armament into those areas that were not hit, they found that the success rate of the planes coming back was, and of the whole war effort, was hugely improved. So with the analogy with the SWOT analysis within our business is that we've got lots of ideas that got rejected, but we learn a lot from them because those are the things that didn't make it. We've got lots of people in the industry that have not made it or have had some severe challenges, and they are the ones that we take a huge amount of notice of and talk to them and find out what it is that was really challenging, rather than go to field days of farmers, like even people who come to the field days with mine. The first thing I say is, there is nothing particularly special about our business, but we understand it quite well, and that's what you need to do. You do not want to be going away and adopting our goals or practices or whatever, maybe our decision-making process. And the other one I really like was, I mean, all these are slightly macabre, but out of the First World War, they found that when they started having soldiers forced to wear the helmets, that the injury rate skyrocketed going through the hospitals. And it was the same sort of thing, that initially the helmets were blamed, but then they found was that all of those soldiers who would normally have been hit and killed were actually now hit, injured, and brought back, but at least they were alive. So it's something that has quite a big impact on me in terms of our business. Yep.
So what are some of the options that you've looked at over the years that have panned out or maybe haven't been so successful?
Oh, absolutely. So within ours, the idea of the SWOT then is to use it full three-dimensionally, is you build on all those strengths, try and reduce as many weaknesses as possible, keep looking for opportunities, and look to minimize the impact of those threats. And so for us, the opportunities actually doesn't feel like we even looked for them, but because we were understanding the strengths of the business, they keep kind of coming to you. So for us, without a doubt, it was finding the first significant share milking job on a very, very good farm for the right person. The second one was actually an opportunity to buy some very high quality land. It was an Ann's family, and they decided to sell the farm, and we came in and managed to negotiate a process to actually take it over. For us, we've had lots of trial work that we've been able to run on the farm in our earlier days, where we had an external income from both the dairy industry and from commercial companies. Some off-farm work that's come up. For me personally, I do a bit of teaching through primary ITO, through dairy training, which is part of Dairy NZ, and I absolutely love it. It's just fantastic being exposed to all these brilliant young managers and share milkers and workers, and the opportunities that come up through that, to have amazing groups here to the farm, discussions, sharing ideas, that's contributed a massive amount to the business. And then those expansions you saw to the business that have come up through land that's come up next door, we're very fortunate. Some of the ones that we haven't done, some of the ones we've not done are, for example, buying a runoff. We've looked at lots of runoff. Always loved the idea of actually of having more control over our young stock, but we've not managed to make that work. We've looked at putting share milkers and full farm managers on in the past, but that's not actually lined up. We've looked at changes to the system. Oh my gosh, the number of times I've paced out where the feed pad will go, but people decided not to because Ann's right, we're a system 2 and we're reasonable at it, and probably saying that actually I'd be crap at being a system 4. But anyway, it's my story. Look, split calving and winter milking and all of those sort of things. But we keep looking at them, and we don't think they're wasted efforts. Those things that we reject, we learn lots from.
So, would you say you're brave enough to just say yes, but you're also brave enough to just say no to opportunities?
Yeah, without a doubt. And in actual fact, it's easy to get, again, the survivor bias in the industry. You get kind of highlighted if you've said yes and something's worked quite well. But it's much, much more important to know when to say no. And the thing is that if you really stimulated yourself in your business to look for opportunities, what that primarily is going to mean is not more yeses. It'll actually mean more no's, because you can't do everything. So you've really got to learn. And for that, you need then an objective process so that when you do it, it's not emotional. But the decision at the end, emotions definitely have a huge part. Absolutely. They have a huge part in the decision, because you acknowledge then, what does it mean to be farming, and your role, and how do you feel about the people that you work with, and what it means to own your animals, and all of those things, some very emotional components. But at the end, you'll be able to make a very cold, simple decision. Yeah. And look, it should be a wild ride. The other thing I meant to say was, we've got an amazing discussion group. We've got this group of individuals. We're meeting for a very, very long time. We all know and trust each other, share our accounts, share all the cock-ups and whatever else. And they're fantastic to lay ideas out and then have them chip in and tell you if it's rubbish, and tell you if it's a great idea, and share their own experiences. At the top of the sharing tree, without a doubt, are other farmers from anywhere. It doesn't matter, anywhere in the world, but certainly the core ones that know you. It's a lot of fun.
That leads me on to a question. You're seen as a mentor. You and Dan are seen as influencers. But I'd like to know, who are your mentors? Who influences you?
So by being, as I said at the start, being in the industry long enough that you accumulate experience and stories, good and bad, and that, and because we share everything as an industry, you've kind of got a duty to make sure you do. For me, I've a huge number of influences, a lot of historical ones, from people who, even some who are not with us now, like Arnold Bryant. But our industry is built on some significant farmers and scientists and industry leaders whose influence and things that they proposed and principles that they ran their businesses and farmed by certainly stay with you. And the late John Wilson and Jim Vanderpoel and Arthur Bryan and all of those sort of significant industry leaders who made some monstrous decisions that really shaped our direction of everything in our industry. But even more relevant are other farmers and friends who, at the other end of the spectrum, they actually intimately understand you and your direction. And so when you bring them up, I've got a mate, AJ, who I talk to regularly, and you just stay so closely in tune that any subtle change they are able to pick up on and not necessarily give you advice, but give you at least a sounding board. Because ultimately we all get to make our own decisions, as you were highlighting before, and you never actually look for someone to make the decision for you. You get someone just to help you figure it out and make sense of it all. Yeah, and then try and read. There's lots of great info out there, and we're very fortunate. And I love Twitter. Actually, Twitter's seriously cool. Some really good farmers out there. Shout out to Olin.
So when you've made your decision and you've gone through the whole planning process, you've looked at whether it's going to work, you've decided, yes, it's going to work, you've started down the track, what do you do to ensure that you are on the right track? What are your checks that you've got in place?
Yep. So it's absolutely vital. It's I've just been sowing new grasses this morning, and I was just thinking about the fact that once you've sown it, the job definitely doesn't end there. You spend the next year or two like young stock, and you look after it. Otherwise, it's all in vain if you're not monitoring weeds and fertility and avoiding pugging and that sort of thing. And farming's full of analogies like this. And so for our business, it's very easy at the beginning to put all the focus in, and it's exciting and new, whatever this new direction. We're looking at a big change by adopting some new technology within a year or so with Halter. That's a very, very big ask. So we're laying out some huge processes for understanding the influence it's going to make in our business. And that it's actually a couple of years down the road that it's very easy to take your eye off it, particularly if a new opportunity comes up and you end up sacrificing all the gains that you've made. So for us then, The biggest one is reassessment of the goal. Is this thing that you've done it just because it did it for the right reasons, successful? Is it still the right direction to be going in? And so for us, all the extended property that we've got, we have the option of actually cutting off that farm, even though we've put everything into it. It needs to be something that needs to be looking at a fresh new light as to where you're at with your life right now, with family and values and all of that. And then the monitoring, which is both a logistical and performance one in terms of how it's running and the production in those sort of KPIs, but even more important, monitoring the financial budgets. So this is, again, where the genius that Anne gives to our business, that we're forecasting ahead all of the time our expected performance, and then you're able to compare actuals with budgeted as to whether they're actually matching. So is this thing living up to your expectations? And if it's not, get just a new look at it.
Right. Yeah. If you've got to be brave enough, I guess, once you've made the decision and you're monitoring it, to get rid of it if it's not working.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yep. You've got to be prepared to park your ego, pride, whatever toxic testosterone-based thing that you've got going on. You've just got to learn. That's right. And that's where, with a bit of age and security and that sort of thing, it's a bit easier. And really honest people around you makes a very, very big difference. Ask the biggest question of all, which is, so what is it you actually really want? So it's the toughest question in the world.
And be honest with the answer.
Yeah, that's right. At least to yourself. So yeah, it's cool. Farming just gives us so many opportunities to do this. We've got opportunities for different options going forward. We've got so many people around, so much information. It's very fortunate. Yeah, and so many challenges.
Take some questions from our viewers shortly.
Sure.
But I wanted to ask you, with regards to the time of change that we're in at the moment, what your advice would be to people who are feeling maybe overwhelmed, because it can be said that with change comes opportunity, but change isn't easy for everybody. So what's your advice to someone who's feeling overwhelmed at the moment?
Yep. And I certainly remember what that felt like. The year that we bought this farm, we saw the industry, this is back in 98, 99, dropping to, everything was plummeting downhill. And we really, and I remember, in the early 80s, during the removal of subsidies, it was absolutely desperate times for people. And throw into that the other element we've got at the moment, which is huge uncertainty. It's very difficult. Doing those budgets sounds all good, but boy, when you start trying to work out what rates, what returns, what climatic challenges you've got in there, you can start losing heart really, really quickly. It's very hard to give concrete advice for someone because it will be dependent and contingent on their own characteristics. Some people like to go at it alone, in which case they need to do some really hardcore research. Other people are more social like me, so you'll do the basic framework and then you'll invite people in to thrash it through. Some will, probably one of the most important things, and this is a bit of advice I give all of the time, you must tune in to what two things are: the opportunities that you're looking at, what the risks are, okay, in every form, and then you must understand what your risk tolerances actually go together. More so often that things will be unsuccessful because there was a mismatch there, that someone was over their head and they're not able to manage the risk. And the management, of course, is of course doing your research, run your budgets, get good advice, do conservative budgets, those sorts of things, and then get out of their depth, which is very stressful. Not being able to sleep at night, and everything becomes a vicious circle. But the opposite happens. You'll get people who will be overly conservative, and they will be in something that has not got enough, well, not even the word risk, enough challenge in there, and they'll start getting bored and disgruntled and start looking at all sorts of ideas that are not actually that constructive, but it's just because they weren't actually feeling they were pushing the boat out there physically, mentally, financially enough. Yeah, so you've got to definitely line up those sorts of things. There's so much help out there that you don't. So I've got this term, I buy the brains. Okay, I'm not mechanically interested or capable The financial budgets I start running out of interest really, really quickly, and a whole number of things. Some of them I had to upskill to a certain degree, but if it's not a core part of you, get those skills in. There's nothing wrong with that, and that's where if you've got complementary skills between yourself and anyone else involved with your business, it's awesome. But don't sweat it, but don't try and fake it either. You just get those brains in whatever way you can.
We've got a live question coming in. What are the main opportunities you see in the future for the dairying scene as we emerge from our current virus carnage?
Yeah, something we've been thinking about quite a bit. My thoughts are really depends on where you're at with your career and your financial position, because there are some off-farm investments which will be some really big opportunities there. And we're seeing house prices will definitely, there'll be some huge downward pressure on that. But we do know longer term that the demand on housing in New Zealand will only go up. We will see some significant immigration pressure as people look to come to the safe confines of the South Pacific. But that, of course, requires you to have some risk tolerance there. Okay, that's a good example of something that we don't have risk tolerance for. So any of those off-farm investments that we've done, almost none of them, because it's just not our thing. Rental properties, commercial property, those sorts of things. Okay, so we've looked at it, and we've weighed up the numbers, and we've even let go of some opportunities we knew would be really good, but definitely not our baby. Other ones will be that there will be some the industry forced to explore some broader markets that will come up, and we know that parts of the Middle East and North Africa, longer term, the next 10, 15 years, through the population increases, are going to have some massive requirement for dairy produce. How that actually manifests for us, we don't know. We've got half of our herd through one of our sheds producing A2 for this last season, which was really successful, and we'll end up making this part of 20k out of it through doing actually very little difference in our system. So where that goes has got an opportunity, and we have seen some reasonable anecdotal and some research data really supporting physiologically the role that the A2 protein has in digestion, particularly people who are dairy or lactose intolerant, whatever that means. So so within that, we will, there's some different opportunities, but hand in hand with that will be really understanding the weaknesses that our industry has and the threats that will come in it from us. And of course, one of the ones that we can't do anything about is our reliance as an export nation on the vagaries of what the world's doing, what the Chinese consumer, what the dollar's doing, and what other world leaders are doing with their non-tariff trade barriers. The US being an extreme example of that, significant trade barriers, and where nationalism goes around the planet in terms of how protected or how global each country decides to become.
Focusing on what we can control and being prepared for what we can't.
That's it. Yep. And you've just got to let go of those ones that you can't. They then become threats. Threats are the things that you've actually got no control over. If you had control over it, it would be a true weakness. Yeah. The other bit of advice I'd have is that we need to carry on thinking very broadly about progression in the industry. And most of those opportunities for progression will come up from relationships that you have. Talking with a mate, previous employers, consultants, vets, whoever. Definitely your discussion group, and those who are prepared to show some initiative. Get a group together of like-minded. Doesn't matter what stage of your industry that you're at. Get a group together and that have things in common and explore where they might all go. And the traditional stepping stones with some of the challenges on both farm prices, cow prices, challenges like in bovis that create some significant risk, will have within it the seeds of some really cool opportunities. And our equity partnerships is a really good example. It's a model that I'd love to see rolled out, even from quite low levels, for people to be able to have a stake in the business, a seat at the table, we call it. So they can come have there and actually wear a separate hat, which is the governance of the actual business. And so we're going to have to be thinking really broadly, but the real answers really have to come from those that are immersed in it. So those particularly younger people who are struggling with where their progression goes in the industry. There'll be lots of help up there, but they're going to have to come up with the answers themselves. That's not easy, not very comfortable, and could be very challenging for us and within my generation, but that change is never particularly comfortable.
No, it's not. It can be scary. And Mata Bridge have asked the question, what about succession? You did mention you were out sowing grass seeds earlier this morning. How much longer do you expect to be hands-on working on the farm? Yeah.
So these are the kind of honest questions that apparently I'm not 21 anymore, which I've been kidding myself for a long time. So it's something that, again, the honest conversations about succession, which we do talk a bit about within the industry, but probably not as, my experience is not as much, particularly not in a constructive, positive sense. The idea of just hanging on as long as you can before you bail out and put a sharemilker on or sell the farm or whatever is just such a negative spin. When you turn it the other way and build it around who you are and what you actually want out of this next phase. So at 56, still see that physically a very active role for the next 5 years at least. But that's easy to look at. Swinging cups, driving tractors. That's actually not the real point. The real point is, why do I want to do that? And am I actually driven by things that are actually not that constructive to me or my family or to the business or the young people coming through my business? I need to let go of some of the reins. And so for succession for us will be mixed on all sorts of levels. We've got some real bailout ones. So the separating off and selling of half of the farm, because it can be one complete unit, is a very significant one that we've been working on. That's been a 15-year plan, why we initially bought those first few pieces of land to be able to eventually end up with a cohesive piece. Right through to we'll have an extra part-time person this season coming in who will free me up from the shed to actually do more of the hands-on animal tractor pasture management is the area that I'm really interested in. And if we take on some of these new technologies, it'll be an area that will be particularly very motivated to. So the next 5 to 10 years is certainly looking very hands-on, but within that, there's no reason why within an EP, an equity partnership, we can't even bring in some of our other staff and have some significant investment for them, and obviously free up some capital on our end as well. So now we're thinking really broadly. We'll be able to travel again one day. Yeah, apparently. Yeah. That's right.
Pete, thank you so much for having a coffee with me today. I have so enjoyed our chat. I've learned lots actually, and your advice is just so sensible, and learning about the processes and not being afraid to say yes, but also not being afraid to say no, and monitoring those decisions as well. Thank you so much for your time, and also thank you to our sponsors: Dairy NZ, Balance, Diosan, FMG, Pioneer, Rabobank, and of course Waikato Milking Systems. I'd like to say a huge thank you to Louise and Noldi, who've been running the show behind the scenes. And we thank you for your questions, and please send us your feedback. You can do so in the comments, and also let us know who you'd like to hear from, who you'd like us to talk to around the kitchen table with a cup of coffee. Make sure you also follow us on Facebook. All you need to do is search Smaller Milk and Supply Herds, and the page will pop up. And keep a lookout for our next morning tea. Noldi is going to catch up with Wade Bell to discuss setting up for next season and your winter to-do list. It never ends. Thank you, Pete. Thanks again. Cheers. Have a fantastic day.
You too. Big shout out to Smash. Good work, guys.
We'll see you.